Are there people within the trans community who regret changing their ex and realized it was just a phase that they grew out of? If so, what was that like, and did you change anything permanently that you now regret? Yeah, I thought I was a guy. Turns out I'm autistic. Autistic traits are seen as inherently masculine. The way that females generally socialize is inexplicit and with unspoken rules and body language, which is something that I struggle with. Not being able to socialize with, as a girl, and all these things I did being seen as masculine, it's a reasonable conclusion to come to. I was also dealing with body dysmorphia, which I thought was related to my gender, but it wasn't. I hated literally everything about myself. Basically a mixture of hating my body and being socially inept led me into believing I was trans. I'm still not comfortable with my gender, but presenting as male didn't help me hate myself less. It just added the extra issues of being discriminated against because of it. I feel this so deeply. I struggled internally with my gender identity for a long time, especially because I had so much trouble socializing, just like you described. Found out that I'm autistic this year. It's been the best thing I ever learned about myself. I still have gender identity questions, but I think I'm a cis woman that just doesn't understand, like, gender roles. Most of the time, I just do whatever the hell I want and don't bother with labels, because I'd have to change them all the time if I did. Like right now I haven't shaved my legs in 2ish months, because I just don't want to, and I like having hairy legs. That could change tomorrow. I communicate in a very masculine way, but I think that's more to do with being autistic. Sometimes I wish I had a dong, but most of the time, I'm fine with how I am. I also really love having breasts and wearing dresses and doing my makeup, and sometimes I can present as very feminine. So frick it. IDC. Call me whatever you need to. When I was 16-19 I really wanted to be a man. But as I met better people and left where I was mentally, I realized that I just wanted the respect that a man got. I was fully comfortable with being a biological woman. I left the people I was hanging out with and it changed me completely. Same here. I've always felt masculine and I always thought it meant I was a man in a woman's body. At the end of the day I am just a very manly woman. And I'm okay with that. One of my children had serious mental health problems as a child, and sometime well into that, formed an extremely strong and compelling belief that he should have been born a girl. This was getting on for 20 years ago. He was about 7. I had come from a queer-friendly background, and while I found the whole thing very challenging, I was wholly supportive. I assumed for a while, in line with the prevailing wisdom of the time, and probably now, that his other problems were a byproduct of gender conflicts. We engaged with the trans community and trans therapists, all that. The situation was acute while it lasted, which was about a year, plus another year of untangling what had unfolded. At one stage he was out of school for a long period and under around-the-clock supervision, because he was talking about self-harm, not really directly related to his trans-like presentation. He was troubled much more broadly than that, but the anxiety around the trans thing didn't help. But once he was fully convinced that everyone would stand by him, he could be a girl, go to a new school where he was only known as a girl, he'd chosen a girl's name, the situation had been explained to all our extended family etc. The whole thing just evaporated. This is a very unusual presentation and resolution for trans, because, clearly, it wasn't real trans. In his case, as much as we can figure, it was an extension of his oppositional defiant disorder. He refused to accept that he had to be limited in any way, including gender constructs. With enormous amounts of intervention, he got through his many underlying problems enough to become a productive and reasonably well-adjusted adult. He's now a flamboyant, metrosexual, rather eccentric man, but definitely identifies as a man. To be clear, I believe that trans exists. I still have a number of trans and gender fluid friends from that time, all that. But not all trans-like presentations are trans. As our experience shows, support for someone presenting as trans is still beneficial even if the person turns out not to be trans. But a certain amount of very gentle and sensitive gatekeeping of irreversible trans therapies is essential to avoid tragic mistakes, in my opinion. This is such a well-measured response. It seems like you really care about your son and you are going to support him no matter what, which can't be said for every parent of a questioning child. A good friend of mine from college transitioned from M to F and went all of the way, including the genital surgery. After a few years, he went back and is now living as a man. I don't know if he did any sort of genital surgery to go back. He had a few interviews on the web and even a blog called something like Retransition that documented the whole thing. The blog is long gone. He was not well received in the transgender community and has reduced his web presence to nothing over the last 5 years. Edited to add. Well, this blew up and I'm not really thrilled with some of the content. I want to make it very clear that I am about as far from anti-trans as one can be. I have a transgender sister. I have known many trans people in my life. As it happens, one of them transitioned back and I told his story. Edited to add too. I just got a DM from a friend of my friend from back in the day. He guessed who it was from my description. Small world. So they just shunned him because he came to the conclusion that he was wrong? That sounds cold. I would think they would support his decision. I don't know enough about what happened to say that he was universally shunned by individuals, but I don't think that that's what happened. He was criticized in various blogs and social media. From my experience, the majority of trans people have no problem with people detransitioning. Problems only tend to arise when people who have detransition are used to demonize trans people as like a worst case scenario. That's the real reason trans people hate discussing detransition. Basically anything they say will be used against them, like oh see, even mirror people want to detransition or it like that. Nailed it. People who detransition are frequently used as horror examples to show why it's a bad idea to transition at all. If anybody with gender dysphoria is reading this, what you're feeling is valid and it's okay. But if you feel like you wanna transition, don't rush it. Take it at your own pace. Start easy, see how it feels. I know it's easy to get impatient, but it's better to make absolutely sure first. If anybody with gender dysphoria is reading this, what you're feeling is valid and it's okay. But if you feel like you wanna transition, don't rush it. Take it at your own pace. Start easy, see how it feels. I know it's easy to get impatient, but it's better to make absolutely sure first. Jumping on this to mention something I have seen. Talk to a gender therapist who takes their job seriously. Have someone to talk through your feeling in a controlled environment. There are gender therapists who will rubber stamp you through the process, which can be fine for some people, but not for everyone. Many of the detransition stories I have heard, the common denominator is that the person was not sure of themselves until after they started hormones. Talk to someone neutral and outside your circle. My best friend got in a relationship with a girl who didn't want to date any guys, so she started manipulating into thinking he was a trans woman. He was madly in love with her, so he went along with it. I knew him well enough to realize that he wasn't trans, but he wouldn't hear it. He was completely convinced he was, despite never having expressed any kind of discomfort before. Only later did he realize he was in an abusive relationship and broke up with her. He never really got far enough to transition in any way, but the memories of that relationship still haunts him. Creepy it. Whoa, that's manipulative. Could have really ruined someone's life. And may have. That is manipulative, but that guy has a ton of issues himself. I know what it's like to be smitten, but there's no amount of love sickness that can make me lop off little cats and risk the serious social consequences of transitioning when I have no dysmorphia, dysphoria or other discomfort with what I am in any way. Yay, I'm one of them. When I was 13 I really thought I was a boy, so I started dressing and acting like one. Even got my hair cut short. Wore a binder. It was mainly because I was really active in the Tumblr community and I sorta got influenced. I stayed like that for 3 years, until one day I realized I'm not a boy, I'm just kinda masculine. I didn't change anything permanently, so I was able to go back to being a girl, but the way I acted still haunts me, lol. Don't listen to people on Tumblr at a young age. Same. From 10 to 14 I was certain I should have been a boy. Most of my friends and hobbies were considered manly and I just felt more like I should have been it all along. Dressed and cut my hair short just so I can fit in. Then I realized that I like being a girl and that I should have been it all along. And that just because I indulge more in manly stuff does not mean that I should be a man too. This thing right here is the thing I want us to fix. A person enjoying a hobby, activity and a person having a specific gender identity should be completely unrelated things. Like, there are no interests that a person should have that should lead them to feel like they're the wrong gender. If someone feels like they should have been a different gender, and they want to identify as that gender, that's totally their decision, which they should feel completely free to make. But this whole thing of making people feel uncomfortable with their gender because of their hobbies is just so toxic.